This subcommittee held a hearing on the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act, over a year ago. Judiciary Republicans have found zero credible or direct evidence that supports their specious claims regarding what they allege is the Department of Justice's uneven enforcement of the FACE Act. What has changed since then is that the subcommittee chairman, along with 47 of his fellow House Republicans, have once again said the quiet part aloud. They have introduced a bill to repeal the FACE Act altogether. That's right. Anti-abortion extremists continue to use violence, threats, and disruption to curb access to abortion. So Republicans want to repeal the law that explicitly protects patients, providers, and facilities that provide reproductive health services from these ongoing threats. Republicans claim that prosecutors are selectively targeting anti-abortion protesters under the FACE Act and declining to prosecute threats against anti-abortion facilities. But there is zero evidence for their claims.
Weaponization, two-tier justice, prioritization. What do these words have in common? They describe the unspoken policy of the Biden administration when it comes to justice. And you can apply this unspoken policy to any Biden administration agency. For weaponization, Biden weaponized the DOJ to go after a former president for political purposes. But he said Trump was undermining democracy. For two-tier justice in the classified documents case, Biden directed the FBI to raid Mar-a-Lago, yet gently browse the classified documents that were sitting in President Biden's garage. For prioritization, Biden's FEMA department in Florida only helped storm victims who didn't have Trump signs in their front yard. Think about that. So, it should come to no surprise that we're talking about another example of weaponization, two-tier justice, and prioritization in today's hearing. We're here today to talk about the DOJ's selective enforcement of the FACE Act. It is aimed at ensuring equal protection for both pro-life and pro-choice movements. Under the Biden administration, I'll let you guess whether the pro-life or pro-choice activists have been charged with more crimes. The FACE Act has been the law of the land for the last 20 years, and the Biden's DOJ in just 4 years has brought over a quarter of all FACE Act prosecutions. There are many examples, but I will highlight an egregious example. In Mount Juliet, Tennessee, pro-life advocates were arrested for singing and praying in a hallway of a shared general medical office building featuring an abortion clinic. They initially were faced with misdemeanor charges. But magically, 17 months later, the DOJ charged these Christians with federal crimes. Among these charged was Eva Edel, now 89 years old. She's a survivor of a communist concentration camp in Yugoslavia after World War II. That's right. In Biden's America, you can escape a communist concentration camp and then come to America and be arrested for praying. Mr. Vaughn, thank you for being here today. I'm glad that you avoided prison time as well, sir. But did you receive 3 years supervised release? Is that correct?
That is correct, after 18 months of pre-sentencing supervision.
Could you have ever imagined living in a country, this country, that you would be arrested for praying, singing, and providing sidewalk counseling?
No.
We, as a country, should have seen this coming. Under the COVID censorship regime that was the Biden administration, they restricted churchgoers from attending church but allowed people to shop in liquor stores. I guess that's because Tito's and Crown Royal were the cure for COVID. Maybe we'll never know. The selective prosecution of FACE Act violations is a two-tier justice at its finest. The Biden administration, Attorney General Merrick Garland's persecution of their political opponents is real and is pervasive. They painted January 6 protesters out to be violent criminals, yet President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, and many other actual felons because they were on his side of the aisle, period.
Repealing the FACE Act goes a long way toward restoring the basic fundamentals of, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. I think those are the first few words, and they're kind of important, especially considering it's the very First Amendment added to our Constitution. It was included to ensure not only that we stayed unified as a nation, but also that certain rights were guaranteed and protected. Now, I do understand why the FACE Act was introduced in the first place, but let's be real. The idea that someone can't stand outside of a facility and express their beliefs? That starts to look less like protection and more like a violation of foundational freedoms. The idea that you can't stand outside an abortion clinic, hold up a sign that says "Choose life," or simply walk up to someone and ask, "Hey, can I pray for you?" That's fundamentally anti-First Amendment. It's anti-American right from the start. And the fact that the Democratic Party, particularly Jerry Nadler, supports something as absurd as this law is not just a gross misuse and misrepresentation of the First Amendment. It's a direct attack on the very ideals of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you do not have the right to life, then you do not truly have the right to enjoy the others. Without life, liberty and happiness are meaningless. Precious metals like gold and silver have consistently outperformed stocks, and there's a good reason for that. They've been trusted as a store of value for centuries, immune to easy manipulation by governments and commonly used as a hedge against market volatility and inflation. That's why I've partnered with the amazing team over at Goldco, an award-winning precious metals company that supports this show and has already helped millions of Americans invest over $3 billion in gold and silver. Right now, they're offering a free copy of their 2025 gold and silver kit, and you might even qualify for their incredible unlimited silver bonus offer. Don't wait. Head to politgold.com or call 855 to 644 gallons to learn more. Now, bringing it back to the heart of the issue, we've lost over 50 million American lives since Roe v. Wade was enacted. In fact, that number is now approaching 55 million. Thankfully, Roe v. Wade was repealed, and the decision was returned to the states, which I believe was absolutely the right call by the Supreme Court. Each state now has the responsibility to enact laws appropriately, and that includes doing it the right way. As pro-life as I am, I'll admit conservatives haven't always gotten it right. That's why I'm such a huge fan of Ed Setzler. He authored the Heartbeat Bill here in Georgia, which has proven to be one of the most airtight and effective pro-life laws we've seen. Unfortunately, not every state has followed suit. Some have passed poorly written pro-life legislation that has completely backfired. Let's also not forget what happened under the Biden administration. With Merrick Garland as Attorney General, the Department of Justice actively targeted Americans who are anti-abortion. It was even reported that the FBI kept a watch list of Catholic Christians who voiced pro-life beliefs, people who simply expressed that maybe, just maybe, the right to life should be protected. That's how extreme it got under Garland's DOJ. But now, with a new sheriff in town and a shift in leadership, the Justice Department under the Trump administration has reversed course. They've made it clear they will no longer enforce those kinds of federal overreaches. Violations of the FACE Act, according to the Justice Department, will now only be prosecuted in extraordinary circumstances, such as cases involving death or serious property damage. And honestly, that was the original intent of the law when it was passed back in 1994, back when I was still in diapers. That year saw a flood of legislation, some of which still leaves us scratching our heads today. Sure, there were a few bipartisan efforts that produced decent results, but the FACE Act, by its very definition, undermines the First Amendment. That's why Congressman Chip Roy has introduced his own legislation aimed at repealing the FACE Act entirely. Now, I'm not holding my breath. It'll probably get stuck in committee. Frankly, I doubt any committee chair will have the guts to let it move forward to a floor vote. But at least he's taking a stand, because repealing this law is a necessary step toward protecting our fundamental liberties. The FACE Act doesn't protect liberty. It protects the idea of someone else's safety and security at the cost of your constitutional rights. And that's not fair. It's like passing sweeping anti-gun laws under the guise of protecting people, when in reality, you're just stripping freedoms from law-abiding citizens. In the end, everyone suffers more. That's not justice under any circumstance. Thankfully, leaders like Wesley Hunt are also stepping up and bringing attention to this critical issue. Here are the receipts. One of the witnesses involved had reportedly been heavily surveilled by the Biden administration, targeted by federal agencies in a drawn-out, invasive process. Even after sentencing, the scrutiny continued, raising serious concerns about how far the federal government is willing to go to suppress individual rights. We've seen this pattern over and over during Biden's term. Thankfully, there are signs of change, but for many Americans, that change isn't happening fast enough. Now, I consider myself a patient guy when it comes to the legislative process. But I'm also eager to see critical reforms, like repealing the FACE Act, finally get codified. That's the kind of action I hope the Republican-controlled Congress will prioritize before the midterms sneak up on us. Because once we enter that season, everything becomes a different political battlefield. So, here's my question to you. Do you believe the FACE Act should be repealed? Do you think it's unconstitutional under the First Amendment? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Wesley Hunt has absolutely brought the receipts and made his case loud and clear. And let's not forget, when we talk about oppression and atrocities, it wasn't just the funny mustache man under the Reich. The communists committed horrific acts too. If you've ever read the Gulag Archipelago, you know just how dark and brutal those regimes were. That's why it's so important to cherish and protect the rights we have in this country. Yes, we're fortunate to live in a nation with guaranteed freedoms, but let's be honest, they aren't always fully protected. And this is one of those moments. In this case, Wesley Hunt did a phenomenal job calling it out. Meanwhile, Jerry Nadler, as usual, stood up to defend the indefensible. But thankfully, we've got leaders like Chip Roy stepping up with real solutions. He's introduced a new piece of legislation, House Resolution 589, part of the 119th Congress, and I believe it's absolutely necessary. The fight for our First Amendment rights continues, and this bill is a crucial step in the right direction. But what do you think? Should the FACE Act be repealed? Do you believe it violates the First Amendment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take.